What was your initial reaction to the sourdough trend? Did you jump in or did you avoid it like I did? That's why it's honestly funny to me that people are asking me to share about my sourdough recipe, how I make sourdough. I was so resistant to even start. It kind of all annoyed me. I even made a little reel teasing about it, but I went on a journey and eventually it led me to deciding I do want to have fresh sourdough for my family every day. So being that there's already an internet saturated with information on sourdough bread, I was like, what can I even share or bring to the table that is maybe a little bit different? I had a few struggles myself when I started and could not necessarily find all the information that I needed. But for me, primarily, I wanted to find a way to make healthy bread for my family that was simple, affordable, and didn't involve me taking a bowl of sourdough in my car to do stretch and folds. I'm not interested in that at all. I'm trying to make this process as easy as possible because that's gonna lead to me actually being consistent and not giving up on this. I just don't wanna overcomplicate it, okay? And if you're in a season where this whole sourdough thing still kind of annoys you, trust me, I've been there, so feel free to click out of this video. No hard feelings. Okay, let's talk about the materials that you will need. So white flour, I use organic white flour that I find from Costco. It's a 2-pack. This is the most affordable organic option that I have found, and I wanted to stick to a white flour recipe. That's just what we always have in our house, and I thought it was the easiest. A digital scale, this is incredibly helpful. I don't think you have to, but it does give the most accurate measurements and saves you time. A mason jar or a container for a starter with a rubber band on it. I feel like that's the easiest way to keep track of the measurements inside. A spoon or spatula for mixing. The larger the jar, the larger and longer your spoon needs to be. It's gonna get messy either way, honestly. Shower cap or plastic bag to cover the dough. Proofing baskets. You don't need this. You could just use a regular basket, I believe, but this for me was just easier. And then a razor or bread lame. This is optional for scoring. I actually use my razors, my leftover razors that I got when dermaplaning, let's talk about another trend, was really in, and maybe I did it for a month and then I stopped. So I had all these leftover razors. Obviously they're clean and unused, but it's worked really well on the sourdough bread. So I just use that. Sea salt, I use sea salt in my recipe. I think you could go with regular salt as well, but I find the sea salt to be very good. And a scraper tool is also optional, but really helpful, and I do love mine. As well as a bowl to do your mixing in, parchment paper, a Dutch oven, of course, and some sort of sourdough starter. So for starter, okay, sourdough starter, you can either buy one online or get one from a friend. I got mine from a neighbor. Hers was really good, really active. She's had it for a long time. Buying one is fine too. Just make sure it's from a trusted source and follow instructions carefully to activate it. It will definitely take more time to activate, maybe a month before you can actually start making bread, whereas one from a friend is a lot more of an immediate start on baking bread. Let me know in the comments, what do you guys do? Did you get your starter from a friend? Did you start from scratch? My sister started from scratch and it took her quite a while to finally get it active and going, but she honestly loved the challenge. So how much of a challenge do you want? Ask yourself that question. As I mentioned, I use the organic white flour 2-pack from Costco. It's the best price that I found, and I didn't want to be juggling specialty flours. A lot of sourdough recipes call for a blend of whole wheat, rye, bread flour, etc. I just want to keep it basic, but it was surprisingly hard to find an all white flour recipe that works for me. Originally, I tried the Ballerina Farm recipe because she does have an all white flour one. But the issue I kept having with her measurements on flour to water was that it was just, the dough was turning out so wet and so sticky, and it was so difficult to work with it. I could not form a ball out of my dough. And I was confused. I didn't know why. That was my biggest struggle in the first month of trying. It was just a lot of trial and error, which is completely normal, I found out, because things like flour brand, humidity in your home, temperature, they can all impact how your bread consistency is turning out. So what might work in Ballerina Farm's home may not necessarily work in my home for whatever reason. And that's where it takes some trial and error, adding some flour, reducing, just messing with the measurements a bit before you figure it out. I ended up finding a different recipe and was able to take those measurements and kind of mix it with some of the techniques that Ballerina Farm used to come up with the recipe that I'm gonna be sharing today. So it's kind of a combination of a few different recipes. So definitely expect a learning curve. Give it a month, okay, or 2 before you just give up. Because anyone that I know that's gotten started on this, it took a little bit of time, a little bit of tweaking, until they finally figured it out. That is truly the hardest part of the whole thing. Once you figure it out and you nail exactly the measurements and the recipe and you have a good starter, then from there, everything else is pretty easy. Okay, so here's the easiest system and process that works for me as a busy mom of 3. I take my starter out the morning before I want fresh bread. I do not believe you need to feed it every day. I absolutely don't feed mine every day. I refrigerate it in between and only pull it out the day before I'm actually ready to bake bread, and that's when I start my feedings. Honestly, it's just not necessary if you don't bake daily. So when you pull it out, you need to feed it to wake it up. I use a 1:1:1 ratio of starter to flour to water by weight. So that's why the scale is helpful and the quickest. After a cold starter has been in the fridge, it typically takes 1 to 2 feedings to become active again. I do think going with 2 feedings right after it's coming out of the fridge is a better idea. You can even do more than that if you really want to build up your starter and make it very bubbly and very active. So when I'm pulling it out of the fridge, I immediately discard a lot of it, honestly most of it, into another jar until there's just kind of a clump left on the bottom and some on the sides. We discard part of the starter before feeding to keep the overall amount manageable and to maintain a healthy balance of yeast and bacteria. If you don't discard, you'd end up with way too much starter and the feedings would become less effective over time. I usually keep my discard in a separate jar in the fridge, and I can use that later for discard recipes. So that's what I use to make like my fluffy discard pancakes in the morning. There's a ton of other recipes out there. Honestly, I haven't really ventured out and tried much else. One thing you need to know is how many grams your jar weighs when it's empty. Take this measurement and write it down somewhere. I keep it in my notes app because we have to do some math to determine how many grams of sourdough is left in our jar after discarding. For example, my jar is 1150 grams. You can see after I've discarded and weighed my jar with whatever starter is left in it, it's at 1418. So I'm subtracting 1150 from 1418 to determine how many grams of actual starter I'm beginning with, which is 268 grams. Since we want to achieve a 1:1:1 ratio of starter to flour to water, all I have to do is add 268 grams of water and then flour. Make sure to zero out your scale before adding each one to get accurate measurements, and then mix it all up to achieve a pancake batter-like consistency. I don't really worry about the temperature of the water. I know some people like to use warm water. I just use filtered water from my sink. It's usually cold, and it always turns out fine. I let it rise. At this point, it's pretty consistent in my home that it takes about 3 to 4 hours to rise and actually double. That's what you need the rubber band on for, so that you can see where are you at on the jar and has it truly doubled. By the afternoon, I'm able to discard again and then do a second feeding. And when you discard and feed again for that second feeding, you want it to be at its most active bubbly state. So don't wait too long to do that. So about 3 to 4 hours later, that'll be by the evening around 7 to 8 p.m. It's doubled again and it's even more bubbly and ready to use. You'll know for sure when it's ready to use if you take a scoop, put it in a cup of water, and it floats to the top. Okay, so the evening comes. At that point, my starter is nice and bubbly and active. It's time to actually start my recipe and prepare my dough. I usually double my ingredients for 2 loaves instead of 1. Here's the actual measurements I use for 1 loaf versus 2 loaves on the screen in case you want to take a screenshot. I'll also have this entire recipe listed in the description below. I start off by mixing the starter and water until it's a milky consistency. And then I go ahead and add in my flour. I continue to mix until I can't mix anymore. And then I get my hands in there and just mix it up as best as I can. It is gonna be really sticky. It helps if you wet your hand beforehand so that the dough doesn't stick to you too much, but it's going to eventually be kind of a shaggy mess. At that point, you could just put like a tea towel over it, and you're gonna wait about 90 to 120 minutes before this next step with the salt. After that time passes, I add the sea salt. I go in with a wet hand and I push and pinch the salt in, try to get it integrated into the dough as much as possible so that it's fully dissolved. I'm usually mixing about 5 minutes here or so until the salt is completely incorporated. I do what's called autolyse, which means I mix the flour and water first and let it rise before adding in the salt. This gives the dough time to develop gluten on its own and saves me from having to do all those time-consuming stretch and folds. By delaying the salt, I let the dough start working for me. It's honestly one of the main reasons I've stuck to doing sourdough. I don't have to babysit the dough all day, take it on car rides, or be home for 6 hours straight just to fold it every 30 minutes. It keeps the process low stress and realistic for my life. And then I even will do this kind of slapping motion with a fold over. I don't spend too much time on this, but I feel like it just kind of forms my dough better and mixes everything together. I then cover it with the shower cap and I stick it in the fridge overnight. This part of the process is the first rise of the dough. So the next morning I pull the dough out of the fridge, flour off my counter or table, scoop it out of the bowl, and when I double my recipe, I will go ahead and cut the dough in half with my scraper tool. Half the dough is going back into my bowl, covered with a shower cap and a plastic bag. This helps slow fermentation down a little more and allows me to bake another fresh loaf later in the week when we run out. I prefer this over baking 2 loaves at once and then freezing one of them, although that's also a great option too. So here I'm just stretching out the dough into a rectangular shape very gently, folding over one side, the other side, and then turning it and rolling it down the middle. I'm then doing a push and pull motion with the dough to kind of form a ball out of it. I do this very gently because I don't want to pop a lot of bubbles, and you can just feel the tension pulling against the table underneath to just kind of help form it into a ball shape. Now we're gonna let the dough rest 20 minutes, and then we come back and we're gonna do that one more time very carefully because the dough is already pretty tight at this point. So we're doing 2 more folds, 1 more roll down the middle, and then that push and pull motion again. So now it's pretty tight. There's a lot of tension, but you can see that the dough is still buoyant and there's a few bubbles forming on the top. This looks ready. We go ahead and flour the basket and then place the basket with another shower cap on top and place it back into the fridge, which is going to be 2 hours. All right, so 2 hours later, pull the dough from the fridge. I've preheated my oven to 450 with that Dutch oven inside. When it's ready, I grab some parchment paper, flour it, and then flip my dough onto the parchment, add some more flour on top and just kind of spread it out. And this is where you can score if you'd like to. If you don't score, that's fine. It's just gonna have a different look and design to it. The scoring helps release some of the air and gives you more control over what that looks like. If you don't have a bread lame, you can also use a very sharp kitchen knife. Just make sure it's thin and clean and try to do it in one smooth motion to avoid dragging the dough. Lately, I like to do this little crisscross design with some wheat stalks in there. It's always really pretty and easy to do. And I go ahead and put it in the oven for a total of 45 minutes. The first 35 minutes are covered, but the last 10 minutes, we're gonna take off the cover. Once it's all done, you pull it out, let it cool for at least 2 hours before slicing into it. That's pretty much it, you guys. So the total hands-on time, I think, is only about 15 minutes that I'm truly actually doing things with my hands. No traveling with my dough, no stress about water temperatures or heat lamps, and it always turns out good. Not one person has told me they don't like my sourdough. Hopefully everybody's telling the truth. No, it's good. It's good, right? Yeah, it's good. I know there are fancier methods with more like complex flavors out there, but I just want to make basic sourdough for my family, and I want to be consistent with it and keep it up without feeling like it's taking over my life. So I feel like that's why I've been able to stick to it for at least a year now, and I've been making about 1 to 2 loaves of bread every week. I hope this video helps sourdough feel a little bit less intimidating to you. Hope you found this helpful. Let me know where you're at in your journey. Are you starting out brand new? Are you maybe retrying because you've given up? Let me know. Love you guys very much, and I'll see you in my next video.